So without further ado, we'll kick it off. So let me share my screen real quick. So I think I'm extremely excited that we just launched some new scores. We call them, which we're leveraging a ton in this new dashboard. So we're calling one a total performance score, one a speed score, and one a strength score. So in order to kind of visualize how these scores work, I made this very quick presentation here just to show you guys this. So hopefully it takes a couple minutes to run through this. So I've kind of hit on the load velocity profile a bunch over the course of this presentation, but it is really core to these scores, and I think core to actually making sense of a lot of this data. It is kind of the holy grail of strength training or data, in our opinion, because it really does profile an athlete, and it gives you the best sense of how an athlete is improving over time. Right. So on the left here, you have a typical load velocity profile. We're fitting a line to a bunch of data. And then typically what you want to see is that load velocity profile shifting up and to the right. So an example, right, velocities on the y-axis, you're moving heavier weights at the same speed, which would indicate an improvement, or you're moving the same weight faster, which would also indicate an improvement, and that curve shifts and up and to the right. But I think what we've seen over time is it's really hard to make sense of this data, or really hard to make get value out of it, because typically you're looking at a graph like this, which is one athlete for 2 periods of time. So if you start asking questions of how is my athlete done every month over the past 12 months, right? What does the actual trajectory of that load velocity profile look like? You would need to have 12 lines on this graph, which would be very difficult to make use of. Or if you want to compare the load velocity profiles of an entire team, right? You'd have way too many lines in this graph, and the lines would be crisscrossing. It's really hard. So what we found is that we needed to condense or collapse this line into some single metrics that coaches can much more easily track over time or benchmark their athletes against one another. Right. So that is really core to what these Perch performance scores are. I know there's a lot of text here, but if you focus on the graph on the left, we've condensed this line down into basically 3 main scores. So we have something called speed score, which is essentially here, it is essentially the y-intercept of a load velocity curve, which is the unloaded max velocity, if you will. So it's kind of related to how fast an athlete can move when there's no load on their back. The strength score is essentially the x-intercept. So you can kind of think of it as like an estimated 1 rep max. So it's very much correlated with, it's kind of how the most weight they can move. And then what we call a total performance score is the combination of those two. So it's basically a speed score multiplied by a strength score. So as an example of how this can be useful is something like this. So you can imagine there's in this example, you can imagine that this is one athlete that is increasing in training age, or you can imagine this is multiple different athletes. Right. So in this example, let's say it's multiple different athletes. Athlete A has a high speed score, right? Really high y-intercept, pretty low strength score, right? Pretty twitchy athlete, but needs to work on their absolute strength. Athlete B, very well-rounded, high speed score, pretty high strength score. Athlete C, low speed score, high strength score. And then athlete D, younger athlete, underdeveloped, right? So looking at these lines, let's say you had 15 more of them on the graph, it's really hard to understand where athletes are, how they compare against one another, what they need, right? How we need to improve their programming in order to get them where they need to be. But you can condense these lines down into a couple different metrics and then put them on something as simple as, let's say, a quadrant chart, right? So you see this athlete B who's well-rounded in quadrant 4. You have this athlete A who is twitchy but weak in this quadrant 2 right here, so on and so forth. So it gives you a really great opportunity to compare, benchmark your athletes, understand where they need to improve, especially, and then benchmark your athletes against their past performance as well. So you can envision that each one of these lines was actually an athlete, let's say when they were freshmen all the way up into senior year, or benchmark athletes against the same athletes of the same positional group as well. There's a lot of really cool uses of this data. So if I was to go back to this dashboard here, just to show you, right now I'm looking at a football team's data for back squat between specific dates. So we can actually see how this total performance score, we can aggregate that score. So essentially every single load velocity profile into a single number and average that across an entire team, right, over a specific time period. So we see that total performance score actually increased for that team by 3%. Their speed score went up by 4%, and their strength score remained pretty constant. A couple other really cool things on this. I'll skip over this for now. But what this graph, all of this data is anonymized, so you'll see a bunch of unknown users here. But what's really cool about this graph is right now we're looking at change over time of a specific metric for each athlete, right? But if you were to look at specific strength training variables, let's say weight lifted over time, that's not really going to tell you anything about their performance, right? So what's really cool about these scores is you can collapse these scores into single numbers, or these curves into single numbers. So right now we're looking at total performance score across an entire team. over that time period. So you can see which athletes' performance score or their load velocity profile actually decreased over that time period and which athletes increased. And we built really cool ways to interact with this data. So if I actually wanted to click on this user, I can click right here, it'll open up in a new tab, and I can actually dive into this user specific data, and I can try to understand why their load, what actually happened. And what you're seeing here with this user is that their load velocity profile actually shifted down because a lot of their data was actually under their historical load velocity profile, right? So you can actually validate a lot of this data that you're seeing here. And it's a great way to actually pinpoint or see which athletes do I need to pay attention to, or is my programming having the right impact? You can see that, again, the strength score, as an example, didn't change much. So if I was to toggle down strength score here, you'll notice that it's being offset. It looks like this team really traded speed for score during this speed for strength during this training period. We had more athletes, it looks like, decrease their strength score. But this is all assumptions, but if I was to look at their speed score, right, we'd had more athletes increase their speed score, with a couple athletes really substantially increasing their speed score. So it's a great way to validate your program as well. This chart right here, very similar data, but just much more in a table format. It's a great way of seeing which athletes have the highest performance scores, which athletes have the highest strength scores, et cetera. And then you can also filter by change, see which athletes actually have changed the most or changed the least as well. And then this graph has gotten, or scatterplot has gotten a ton of really cool feedback. So I won't spend too much time because I talked about it in that presentation, but it's essentially taking what we have here and we're making it real. So what you have here is strength score on the x-axis, speed score on the y-axis, and we're plotting all of your athletes, different positional groups onto a plot. So you can really start identifying. If I mouse over athletes, I can see who they are, et cetera. And then a couple other cool things on this chart or on this page is this is not related to those scores, but we have essentially training distribution over time. So we start or default to average mean velocity. So you can see by rep count or any other kind of volume metric, are we working in the right areas, right? You might program a certain goals or certain attributes that you want to develop, certain speeds you want your athletes to be within, but this allows you to see over a specific time period where we actually hitting the velocities that we want to. You could also do weight and percentage of 1 rep max as well, as opposed to just velocity. And then finally, kind of the very typical way to use velocity-based training or see if your athletes are progressing over time is actually look at one of these performance metrics like a velocity or power output and then hold intensity constant. So let's say we wanted to say, I could actually go down here and see, okay, this team spent probably the majority of their volume between 60 and 65%. So I can come up here and I can say 60 to 65%, and I can hold that constant. And then I can look at, let's say, best rep mean velocity. And I can look at this on a day period. So I can see, are my athletes across the entire team moving their 60 to 65% faster over the course of this training period? And it looks like overall this team is over that time period, right? It's subtle, but they are. We can also drill down specific positional groups if we want to. I won't do that here, but there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this. The last thing to touch on this dashboard is what we call this train status. So what train status is essentially looking at an athlete's most recent performance or the performance at the end of this time period, and it's comparing that performance relative to their load velocity profile. And if they are performing under their load velocity profile, we will flag that either with a red or a yellow. So if I was to click into this, we can actually see which athletes are performing under their load velocity profile. And let's say I just click this user negative 14%. It'll take me to this athlete's page, and we'll see that they're kind of sporadically around their load velocity profile, but a lot of their most recent data was actually underneath the load velocity profile, which would indicate that this athlete might be somebody that you want to pay closer attention to, have a conversation with, just follow up with, right? So that is our new train dashboard, kind of scores, train dashboard, everything packed together. We as a company are emphasizing really doing a lot. We certainly want to surface a lot of the raw data. If you want to export, get into another system, that's certainly an option. But we also want to try to answer questions as seamlessly as possible, right? We serve a number of different types of organizations, and we think there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do just with the dashboards and visuals that we built here.